Evaluation, cognitivist view of language learner. A way to evaluate the cognitive approach to language learning is to look at how does it view the language learner. So in cognitivist approach, the language learner is no more than a processing machine that processes information. It is not interested in the affective aspect. It is not interested in the social aspect of the learner. It is only interested in what goes on in the mind of the learner. Having said that, it is also important to understand that cognitivist approach is more interested in the peculiarities or the differences of individuals rather than arriving at some universal idea of how the learning occurs. So, it is interested in the mind of an individual learner as processor of information. Now, what are the distinctive features of a cognitive approach? If we are to sum up those features, we would say that it is definitely linked with neurology and neurobiology, that is the structure of the brain itself, and it tries to understand how is information related to language processing distributed and represented actually in the brain, in the biology of the brain itself. And that is why it gives us unique insights into how the brain functions, not only how the brain functions, but also when people face a number of disabilities in relation to language, the cognitive approach allows us to understand the stem or the root of those disabilities and how to go about them, because it deals with the actual architecture of the brain itself. So what are the advantages of looking at things in the way the cognitive approach perceives it? The first advantage is that it is neurally inspired. So it is grounded in science. It is grounded in actual representation of how the learning goes on in the mind of a person. So it's very scientific. It presents how the different types of language aspects are distributed across different brain parts. So that is why it explains why when people suffer one disability or the other, so how does it affect their language ability to either speak it or to comprehend it. And then it is data-driven. Because it is so scientific in nature, it is driven by data, it is driven by evidence, and so when it comes up with some prototypes or the main types of representations, there is actual scientific evidence that proves it. And the last advantage that the cognitive approach has, that it gives us certain models of learning. It actually tells us about the process of learning itself as it happens in the brain. In this regard, it is slightly different from other approaches because it does not give us any static representation of language learning. The difference between static and representation and a processing model of representation of how the language is learned is that when you are focusing on the process, you actually try to find out how does it happen one step at a time. And when you are studying any static representation, you just are able to understand what has happened at a specific given moment. So in this aspect, we can say that the cognitive approach is more dynamic than other approaches. It is very scientific in nature, and it gives you an understanding into certain disabilities related to language processing. Having said that, please remember that cognitive approaches also can be divided in two parts. So one approach within this cognitive approach believes in the existence of universal grammar, while the other approach, for instance, those working under connectionism, more or less, they are focused on the language learning or the process information processing models. So it is less interested in this innate capacity of the individuals to have that enables them to learn a language. Rather, they say any language that is learned is based on the basic principles of information processing that goes on in the minds of individuals.